Alright folks, so in this video I'm going to be looking at the context in Mustang in a little bit of detail. I'm going to give you a little bit of background information about the context in which the film was made, looking at things like political context, social context, things like gender representation, stuff like that. Just a reminder, before we crack on, that Mustang is for Section A of Component 2 in EDUQAS Film Studies, and for both films in Section A, so that's Mustang and Taxi Tehran, context is one of the key study areas that you've got to look at, along with film form and meaning of response as well. So it's one of the main three things. So what I'd probably say is that it is quite likely that you will get a question on context in some way, shape or form in the exam. Not guaranteed, but the exam board have used context-based questions, or certainly questions that are to do with key issues, which is related to context, in the past. So it's very much something that you could, wouldn't surprise me if you open your exam paper next year, end of the year, and it's staring you in the face. These are some of the past exam questions that the films have asked. So you can see there in all 2020, 2021, 2022 and 2023, you've had a question that is in some way related to context. So you got the first one: how far do each of the films you have studied represent key characters in ways that challenge audiences' expectations? So the whole idea of representation there, you could definitely link to context. 2021, social and cultural contextual studies are important when attempting to understand the film. Discuss this statement with reference to examples from the two films you have studied. 2022, discuss how the two films you studied explore the political and social context of their settings. And then finally, 2023, discuss how one or two contextual factors have influenced the aesthetics of each of the films you have studied. So there you go, that's quite an interesting question. You've got context and aesthetics linked together. That's quite a nice question, that one. I'd kill for a question like that again, but yeah. So, this is basically going to be a lot of background information to do with Turkey. Obviously, you should all know that Mustang is set in Turkey. The director, Deniz Gamze Elgiven, is Turkish. She was born in Turkey, although she moved to France when she was 6. So she does have some experience in what it's like to grow up in Turkey. So all the issues that I'm going to talk about in this video, they are ones that the film does directly address. These are issues that are facing the 5 sisters who are our protagonists in the film. So, just a bit of background information on the geography of Turkey. So if you don't know, Turkey is split across 2 continents. You've got the small eastern part of the country called the East Thrace, which is this little tiny bit here that contains Istanbul, along with these 3 other places as well that I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce because I'll just mess it up and embarrass myself. This part of Turkey is in Europe, so it is, geographically part of Europe. It's not part of the European Union, but it is continentally in Europe. What's interesting though about this is these little statistics here. Considering how small a proportion of Turkey this actually is, you've got a lot of people living in this particular part of Turkey. So it's quite a densely populated part of the country. So in this small section here, which is only 3.4% of the actual land area of Turkey, you've got about 12 million people in there, which is a lot to cram into that tiny little section here. Alright, considering in this section here, the Asian part of Turkey, you have got 68 million people there. So that's quite a densely populated area, especially Istanbul. So this is the East Thrace, which is part of Europe. Okay, it's called it's known as a transcontinental country. On the western, so it's the western isn't Europe. The eastern side of Turkey is part of Asia, which is pretty much the rest of the entire country, just all of this section here. All the stuff near the Mediterranean, near the Black Sea, bordering Georgia, Syria, etc., etc. This is Asia. The film Mustang is set right at the top here, right on the coast of the Black Sea, and we see that right at the start in the opening sequence, where the girls are playing in the sea when they finish school. It's set in a place called Inebolu, and again, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. If I am, great. If not, sorry, but you know, I'm not an expert in Turkish pronunciation. So it's set here. This is quite a rural part of Turkey, very not necessarily poor, but certainly much less affluent than places like Istanbul, for example, or Ankara, the capital. So that's quite important to understand where the film is set geographically, because even though these two places are part of the same country, they do have a lot of key differences. So, the first thing we need to talk about is how free Turkey is as a country. And according to the Freedom House Index, which is an organisation who will rate how free countries are out of 100 based on political rights and civil rights as well, it is been categorised as being not free. It's got a score of 32 out of 100, which you can see there, which is not particularly very high. At the moment, the president of Turkey is President Erdogan. He's been in power since 2002. He has recently just been voted in for another term as well, even though the election was very, very close. I think I've got a slide that a bit later as well, actually. He has also faced a lot of open hostility within the Turkish country as well. There was a famous military coup that happened there. It's on here, 2016, which is where the parts of the Turkish army basically tried to overthrow the president. It failed, and he is still in charge at the moment. So what these basically means is it's the rights that individuals have. It's the freedoms that individuals have. So political rights include things like fair elections. It includes multi party systems, things like that. And civil liberties include things like, your individual freedoms. So things like freedom of expression, things like sexuality, things like that, all sorts. So these are really interesting to read. I'm not going to go through the whole thing now, but you just search the Freedom House Index into Google. You can read a report for every country in the world. So I'd highly recommend having a quick glance through the one for Turkey and also the one for Iran as well when we look at Mustang. It is quite a heavily, what's I'm looking for, controlled country by President Erdogan and his party. So you got a little stat there that says more than 90% of the Turkish media network have close personal ties with President Erdogan, which is obviously one of the big things that impacts on the freedom of that particular country. There are also restrictions on LGBTQ plus parades, protests, and women's rights is quite a big one as well, and that in particular links in quite nicely in Mustang. Oh, here you go. This is some stats from the 2023 presidential election. So the presidential election in that year, the first round of votes, it was too close to call, so they had to go for a second round of votes where President Erdogan was re-elected with a margin of 52% to 48%. So that is quite close. A lot of people did think Erdogan was going to lose, but he closer, very narrowly won the election in the second round of voting. So he's going to serve another term as president. Just for comparison, here are the Freedom House Index scores for the UK and the United States. So we are 93 out of 100 compared to the United States, which is 83 out of 100 as well. Some of the most free countries in the world include Scandinavian countries, so places like Denmark, Sweden, Norway, New Zealand as well has quite a high score on here, and some of the lower scoring countries include places like Syria, Afghanistan, North Korea, a couple of others as well. I think maybe Sudan or South Sudan, I can't remember. So, first of all, let's go back a second. What you can establish from here is that the individual rights and freedoms of the Turkish people are limited, let's say. Gender issues as well are quite problematic. This is another organisation that highlight important issues from different countries in the world, which is the Gender Gap Index, which is they will monitor the levels of gender inequality in various countries in the world. So out of 146, Turkey was 129th, which is not great. These issues are particularly important for Mustang because the film is about, you know, the five girls who are, you know, it's about their restrictions and their lack of empowerment and their their lack of freedoms, essentially. So, a couple of other interesting stats on here as well. You've got the fact that Turkey is the 17th biggest economy in the world, but it's 24th last country in terms of gender inequality. Another good stat here, and these are really good for referencing in essays. 40% of Turkish women are exposed to physical and sexual violence at least once in their lifetime, as stated in domestic violence research. In 2015, which is the year that Mustang came out, 284 women were killed by their husbands or immediate partners, which is a staggering number. But again, these are all issues that the film tackles or attempts to what's I'm looking for, make people or make the spectators more aware of. There is a staggering amount of discrimination in Turkey. I'm not going to bother reading the whole thing because you can read a lot of the information on these links here. But there's some of the other issues that are prevalent, especially in particular rural parts of Turkey, include things like child marriages, arranged marriages, and again, these are issues that Mustang tackles as well. So there are clear issues of gender inequality in Turkey, especially in the workplace, is what it says there as well. Yeah, some more, I'm going to say interesting statistics here as well, but you've got practice suggesting that girls as young as 9 years old can marry when the Directorate of Religious Affairs briefly endorsed a set of rules and documents. There are, you know, high levels of domestic violence, like I said. I'm not going to bother reading these whole things out because you can read them yourself if you want to pause it. But there's what it basically comes down to is that there is a staggering level of not just gender inequality, but, you know, violence against women, and that's been something that's been quite widely reported in the media over the last couple of weeks or a couple of years or so. Yeah, I'm going to skip past that one. But again, if you want to pause and read it, you can do. Some nice quotes from President Erdogan here as well, which have been taken from various different BBC News sources. You cannot put women and men on equal footing. Our religion regards motherhood very highly, and feminists don't understand that, and they reject motherhood. So you can certainly see how this sort of, what's I'm looking for, attitudes, I suppose, are, you know, attitudes that are held in the highest authority as well, not just in, you know, particularly rural parts of the country. So these are actual quotes from President Erdogan. There you go, Turkey President Erdogan, women are not equal to men. So there is a certain sort of attitude towards the domesticity of women. And again, something that's massively important, an issue that's discussed in Mustang as well. Now, this is quite a good little case study to look at. Quite a recent case study as well. So I'm just going to sip a tea there. And again, this is important because 2015, the year Mustang came out, so you can see why, you know, the film has these, you know, it resonates quite well with what was going on in Turkey at that time. So this, again, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here. Özcan Aslan, I'm going to guess that right? Who knows? She was murdered whilst resisting attempted rape on a minibus in Turkey. sparked outrage mainly because of the way that the Turkish authorities responded to the incident, which, as you can see on that third PowerPoint there, basically was attempting to blame her for going out alone in public, which is staggering, absolutely staggering. It led to mass protests, and rightly so, global outrage across the country as well. But it's certainly something I think that's quite useful to look at due to the fact that it came out in the same year as Mustang. Now, what you've got to think about is how are these issues presented to us in Mustang. Now, the most obvious thing to look at is the fact that the society or the community in which the girls are living in is very much represented as a society that is patriarchal. If you don't know what patriarchy means, it is a society or country that is ruled or controlled by men. And it's not just something that you can see in the narrative of Mustang as well. This is definitely something that is presented to us through the aesthetics of the film as well. I think I did mention this on the introduction to Mustang video, but you can see you've got all these shots here where the aesthetics clearly show the female characters being subservient to the male characters, or certainly being inferior. I mean, look at this shot here. You know, look at how much space the men take up. Look at the fact that they're all looming over this small innocent girl in the middle who is isolated, who's alone. You know, this shot here of one of the sisters at her wedding day, you know, where it's meant to be the happiest day of her life, but where is she? She's pushed into the background. What's in front of her? Two random men who we don't even know. So even these random, you know, unrelated men who have got no relevance to the narrative are pushed in front of whichever sister this is here. Again, this character, you got the shot here, you got the sort of group shot of these four men sat down having a drink at the table, eating food, whereas the girl pushed away. And then finally you got this shot here, which is clear, obvious example of a phallic symbol. You get this in, this is probably more useful for the scene itself in terms of the actual editing of the sequence, because you get this shot in a sequence where the five sisters are basically being paraded around a little village square where they're trying to be basically advertised as potential wives, essentially. Right, so institutional context. Again, I have mentioned this on a previous video as well, but institutional context could be quite relevant to a question on context as well. So the big thing you could look at for institutional context is mainly down to the fact that Erdogan is been accused of presenting an Orientalist description of Turkey, or depiction of Turkey, sorry. Orientalism is the idea is where you look at an Eastern society, community, attitudes, whatever, through a Western perspective. So it's almost the argument that what the Turkey that Erdogan is presenting to the audience is not accurate. It's a backwards representation of Turkey. And a lot of people have accused Erdogan of that because she is Turkish, but she grew up in France. Therefore, she had a westernized perspective of Turkish attitudes. Edward Said's theory of the other as well is quite important when you're looking at Mustang as well. So the other is the idea, is very, you know, a paraphrased definition of the other. But it's the idea that non-Western attitudes in forms of culture are often represented as alien to a Western spectator, different, you know, almost like clashing with Western beliefs. So again, this is something that Mustang has been accused of doing. So I think realistically, in terms of the main things to think about for context in Turkey, first of all, the lack of political freedom, but also I think probably what's even more important is the gender issues, because they are front line and centre of the film's narrative, and also the aesthetics as well. So you could talk for ages about how the gender inequality has influenced the aesthetic factors of Mustang really, really easily. So for me, that's probably the big one, I think. I think Taxi Tehran probably has like a more varied range of issues that you could talk about, but I think for Mustang, gender is the go-to one, I think, because it is so much hardwired into the narrative of the film and the aesthetics as well, I think. So when you're watching the film, these are the things that you should be thinking about. Okay, how is gender represented? All right, you should be able to clearly see that the film is depicting rural Turkish society as a patriarchal society. Okay, and I think that's probably also something to think about with Turkey as well, because most of the film, probably like 95% of the film, is set here in İnebolu, but there is a small portion of the film that is set in Istanbul. So I think what could be quite interesting to think about is, how are these different parts of Turkey represented? How is Istanbul represented differently compared to İnebolu? Is it represented differently? You might think it's pretty much the same, but you should note there is a clear contrast in the way the two places are represented. Age, I think, is probably important as well, because you've got to think about, especially age in the female characters, because there is a clear contrast between the younger characters in the film compared to the younger female characters, and the elderly female characters. So I think they're really useful to be thinking about. Binary opposites, we will do a bit more of this in class, but things like East versus West, male versus female, they're probably going to be the two main ones I think that we could probably focus on. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video on context in Mustang. So just as a quick summary for me, gender issues is the big one to focus on. That's the one I think that you could spend a lot of time analysing. So what I'd suggest you do as well is maybe go through each of these slides and pause it, just so you can make a note of any of the key stats that you want to have a look at, especially some of the ones on gender issues, because any of these are really useful for making reference to in an essay on context. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. If you got any questions about this or anything you don't understand, send me or Rob an email, come and see us. Other than that, I'll catch you next time.